Hi, in this video, we will see Java variables. So what do you mean by variables? So first we'll see what is fields. Fields refer to variables declared outside the methods. Sometimes you will create a variables outside the methods inside the class. Those are called fields. The same way, what do you mean by variables then? Variables are referred to declarations inside the methods. If you create anything inside the method, those are called variables. So that is just a definition, but how a variable looks like and how you'll create a variable and what is the purpose of variable. So now we'll see variable. A variable is a named reference to a memory area where value of the variable is stored. Okay. In simple terms, variable is a memory area inside your system, and it will there you will store your actual values. Okay. When you create a variable, it creates some space in the memory. Okay. When you want to use the value multiple places, then we'll store that value in a variable and then we can use the same, that is reusable. Okay. If you create a variable, whenever you need that same value multiple times, then you can refer this variable. So that is called reusability. And how the syntax looks like for a typical variable. So it will be data type. First you'll have a data type and then variable name equals to variable value. Then what is data type? So that we will discuss in our next video. And here the data type, variable name and variable value. Okay. So what is data type? So data type refer to type of information stored in the memory area. So what kind of information you're going to store? A number, a character, a sequence of characters means a string or word. Okay, that kind of information you need to mention. I am going to store this kind of information. So that will be represented by data type. And then variable name refer to name of a variable, means if you want to give a name to that variable, that is what actual variable we are discussing here. And variable value refer to the value to be stored in memory area. So the actual value where you will store, for that you will give a name that is called variable. Okay. So that is a syntax of a typical variable. Now, if you see, so int I equals to 10, sample a variable I initialized. This is called initialization. Int I is equals to 10. So you will write this type of code in your program in Java. Then here, what is this int? Int means it's a data type, means integer type of data I am going to store. Okay, so in detail we will discuss about these data types in our upcoming videos, but here int means data type. I is equals to the variable name. Okay, so the variable name, you said it referred to name of a variable. So 10, so this is the variable value. Actually we are interested in this 10 actually, but for this I'm giving a name called I, and this 10 is an integer type of value, so I am representing here this is an integer. So if in this case, if you go to like what do you say, in the memory, so let's assume this is your RAM, this circle is your RAM. Okay, inside the RAM it will reserve some memory for your variable. For this 10, it will reserve some memory. Okay, how much memory? Integer will take some specified amount of memory that we will discuss in our upcoming videos. But here, this is a 10 value, it will store some memory. And this I will point to this 10. Whenever you use I in your program, then it will return you the value 10. Okay, multiple times if you use this I anywhere in your program, you will get this, it will point to this one, it will fetch this value. Okay, that is the actual way how it will work inside the memory. Okay, so this is how you will represent, means initialize a variable and internally it will works like this. Okay, so now types of variables. So there are n number of means there are 4 types of variables. Okay, so we'll see one by one. The first one is instance variables. Okay. Then static variables, local variables, then method arguments or method argument. So these are 4 types of variables are available. So we will see one by one. Okay. So instance variable. What do you mean by instance variable? So instance variables are defined within a class but outside the method. Okay. Sometimes something like fields that we have seen in this starting of this video. So instance variables are fields are defined within a class but outside the method. So what is a method? We have seen that main method in one of our the program that is called first Java program. Okay. So but what exactly method that we will discuss in our upcoming videos. Each instance of class contains its own copy of these variables. Okay. Each instance of class contains its own copy of these variables. Instance variables are non-static variables. These are non-static variables. These are also called state variables. Okay. Instance variables are defined within a class but outside the method. Each instance of a class means object contains its own copy of these variables. Okay. And then means if you create an object, we already discussed, we can create multiple objects to a same class. So when you create an object, it will contain its own copy of this variable information as it is class level. So instance variables are non-static variables. You cannot, and these are also called state variables. If you take a sample snapshot, so public class, this is class name, instance variable example, and inside that you see int I is equals 10. There is no method. I'm not writing inside any method. So that is the reason it is called instance variable. Okay. So moving towards static variable. A variable which is declared as static is called static variable. Static is a keyword. Okay, reserved word. If you use that static keyword, then it becomes static variable. Static variables are also called as class variables. Okay. There is exactly one copy of this variable in existence regardless of how many times the class has been instantiated. So in our previous instance variable, if you create multiple objects, each object will have its own copy. But for the static variable, how many objects you create, all the objects will refer to the same variable. It will not duplicate anything. Okay, it will be only one value. Okay. So typically you will initialize like this: public class, static variable example, inside this, outside the class. So static variable or class level variable, int I equals to 10 we have seen, but in front of that if you put static, a keyword, then it will become static variable. Okay. Moving forward, local variable. Local variables are defined within a method. So till now we have seen outside the method. If the variable you declare inside a method is called local variable, and the scope of that variable is restricted to that method only. Okay, outside the method, if you try to access, you cannot access these local variables. Because of that, these are local to that method only. Scope of that variable is restricted to that method. There are temporary variables exist during the method execution. These are not accessible from the rest of the classmates. Outside the method, you cannot access. So how it looks like this. So public class, local variable. Inside that I have a method, main method. So inside the method, I create some, means initialize one variable. Then it is called local variable. Okay. Method argument. An argument is a variable that is passed to a method when the method is called. Okay. You can create a method with some, by passing some variables that we will see in our another video called methods. When we discuss about the methods, we will see. Arguments are also only accessible inside the method that declares them, though a value is assigned to them when the method is called. So if you take something like this, so I have created one method, public static void add. Inside this, you are giving some variables, int a comma int b. So these are called method arguments. When you call this method somewhere, you see I am calling this method here in this main method, add 10 comma 20. These are all method arguments. Okay, these are method arguments. So variable naming conventions, we already discussed these things in our previous video called Java naming conventions. Again, we will discuss. Java variable names are case sensitive. Okay. Java variable names must start with a letter. Variable names must start with a letter or dollar or underscore character. Must start with a letter or dollar or underscore character. After the first character of a variable name, name can also contain number, dollar or underscore characters. Again, there is no problem. Once you start with valid things, then you can use these things in between also. Okay, you can use numbers also that we already saw. Variable names cannot be reserved keywords. You cannot use reserved keywords for this. I cannot use a static for int static is equal something. We have seen int I is equals 10, right? Int stat is equals 10. I cannot do like that. Okay, that is reserved keyword. Variable names should be written in lowercase. If a variable names consist of multiple words, then follow camel case, means you can say student name. If it is student, S should be small, student. But if you have multiple words, student name, the name will start with capital letter. That we already saw. Static final fields should be names in all uppercase, typically using underscore to separate the words in the name. If you use static final, you will use uppercase. Okay, everything that we have seen constants. Same way you'll use static final also these constants. Okay. So what could be the possible interview questions, right? So in the interview, they may ask what is variable? Can you define a variable? What types of variables you know? Then what is instance variable? What is static variable? What is local variable? Can you tell me the difference between all these things? Okay, you may face these kind of interview questions. Okay, so that's all in this video. Thank you. Hi, in this video we will see local variables in Java. So what are local variables in Java? Local variables are defined within a method or constructor and blocks. So method we already discussed. So constructor also similar to method, but some changes are there. But high level, we can say that is also one of the methods. And blocks means we have some loops and no if else blocks and while. We will discuss all these things in our upcoming videos. But those blocks also, inside that blocks also, if you create any variable, that is restricted to only that block. Okay, by taking one example, we'll see scope of that variable is restricted to that method, constructor and that block. Okay, you cannot use access modifiers for local variables. We have seen access modifiers like public, private, protected, all these things. These cannot be used for the local variables. These are temporary variables existing during the method execution. So the scope of that variable is inside the method. So whenever method is executing, these will get created, and once the method execution completed, these will be terminated. So these are called temporary variables with respect to the method execution. These are not accessible from the rest of the class. Okay, so you cannot use outside of that method. Okay, then we will see all these things by taking an example. Let's go to Visual Studio Code. So here I created one of the classes called local variables, and I created public static void main method. So let me create one method, public void local variables method, something like that. So what I'll do here, I'll create int a is equals to 10. I will initialize one integer variable. Okay, and I'll create one boolean b is equals to 2. Okay, so when you write something like this in this method, the scope of these variables in between these brackets only, these square brackets. Outside of these square brackets, you cannot use these two variables. Okay, so now I will try to print these. system.out.println A. Okay, and the same way I'll try to print B also. Okay. Now, if I run this program, I will not see any output. Okay, the reason is, so these are, if you want to execute any method, that should be called from this main method. It will execute only main method. Main method is the starting point. Inside this, you need to call this method. Okay, how you'll call this method? If this is a static method, you can directly call. If it is not static, you need to create an object to your class. Okay, so local variables, I'll create an object. So let me run this one first. So I'm executing it from the command prompt. So, Java local variables dot Java. You see that nothing printed, but there is no error, means there are no errors, no issues, but nothing to print. The reason is, even though if you have system.out.println, but if you want to print these statements, you need to create an object to this class and call this method as this is not inside the main method. Okay, so let me create an object. So local variables is equals to new local variables. Okay, so this is called constructor, default constructor. Okay, so L dot local variables method. Okay, so I have written one method. Inside method I have two variables and I'm printing those, and I calling this method using this class object. Okay, now let me execute the same thing here. Now you see that 10 and true were printed. A is 10, B equals to true. But if I want to use this A outside of this method, okay, I'll try to print the same thing, this one. Okay, this one I want to print here. Okay, so now if I want to print the same thing here, you will see what we will get. You see that error cannot find symbol, this A. So in this location, okay, so compilation failed. The reason is this is a local variable to this local variables method. You cannot access outside of this method. The scope of these two variables only inside this method. Okay, now I will comment this code. Okay. And we discussed this one method and inside a block. Okay, block means I'll take one of the blocks called for loop. Okay, we normally use for loop for int I is equals to 0, I less than 1, I plus plus. So we will discuss what is for loop, how it will work, all these things in our upcoming videos. Just to show you that if this is a block, the scope of I is in between these two only. It is not even outside of this block, means inside the method also you cannot access. Okay, I'll try to print this. I will try to print A. I will try to print A, and at the same time I will try to print I. Okay, so we'll mention to see the inside the block. Okay, just to see difference where it is exactly executing. Okay, so now if you try to execute, okay, we already created the object for this method. If you try to execute, you will see what happens. You see that inside the block 10 is printing. This is the scope of this A is inside this method, means this block is also part of this method, right? So I can use this A inside this block. Okay, the reason is this block is also inside this method only. But this scope of this IE is restricted to this block only. If I try to print the same thing outside that block, inside the same method, where we have written this block is inside this method, right? So inside the method only, I'm writing this, I'm trying to access or print this I, even though it is not accessible. The reason is scope of this I is in between, means inside this block only. Okay. If you execute the same thing now, you will see that I cannot find symbol system.out.println inside the block I. So you cannot use this I. Okay. So that is what local variables to particular to this one. And one more thing we discussed, what is that? Constructor. Okay. Constructor is also similar to method. Public, the name of the method is should be same as your class name. Class name and if your method name both are same, this method is called constructor. Okay. This is constructor. This is method. And this is kind of block. Okay. So now inside this also, I will write the same thing. Okay. I'll write the same thing. But instead of 10, you can take 10 also, no problem. But the same output you will get. But how this constructor will get executed? Right. This method L dot local variables demo I'm calling. But what about this? So this will get executed when you create an object. Just with this line, if you create this line, it will automatically will get executed. Okay, no need to call explicitly like how we call this method. Okay. So if you execute the same thing now, you see that 10 true, 10 true. Why 10 two times? One is from this method, one is from the constructor. Okay. And another, these things are from the block. All right. So this is how these things will work. Right. And one more thing. So if I try to put public int I, okay, public int I, and okay, so if you try to execute this, is that you are getting so many errors. So public illegal start of expression. This is illegal. Error identifier expected, something like that. Okay. So this is not needed. Not needed means even not allow. Okay. So if I execute the same thing, I change it from public to private, still you will get the same error. The reason is for local variables, modifiers are not applicable. The reason is we know the scope of this is inside this only. Why to mention all these things? The purpose of putting modifiers is you need to mention the scope. Means private means inside this class only. If you write it outside of the method. Okay. If it is public, private, protected, whatever it is, the scope is inside this method only. Then no need to mention explicitly which modifier you want. Right. So because of that, it will not allow. So this is all about local variables. Right. We create a local variable in the method, in the constructor, in the block, and these modifiers will not applicable for the what? These local variables. Okay. So if you go back to the slide, you see that cannot use access modifiers. These are temporary variables, means inside the method you will access. Scope of that variable is restricted to that method, constructor, and block. So we have seen all these things. Okay. So what could be the possible interview questions from this video? What is variable in Java? High level question. So inside that, people may ask, what is local variable? Can you tell me what are the properties of local variable? So you can say that is restricted to your method, constructor, block. You cannot use outside the method, and you cannot use these modifiers to the local variables. Okay. So that's all in this video. Thank you. Hi, in this video, we will see instance variables in Java. Okay, so instance variable, what do you mean by instance variable? Instance variables are defined within a class, but outside the method. So in our previous video, we have seen that local variables are defined within the method, not outside the method. Okay, this is reverse of that. Instance variables are defined within a class, but outside the method. Each instance of class contains its own copy of these variables. So if you create an object, each object contains its own copy of these instance variables. When an object is created with the use of the keyword new, then instance variables are created. And when the object is destroyed, instance variable is also destroyed. Okay. So these are class level, right? When you create an object, it will instance that variable. The moment when you destroy the object, so these are associated to the object, right? So object destroyed means, so we can instance variables also get destroyed. Okay. We can give access modifiers to instance variables. In our previous video in the local variables, we have discussed that access modifiers are not possible to give for the local variables, but here you can provide the access modifiers. Instance variables visible for all methods, constructor and blocks in the class. Okay, this is not restricted to anything. If you create at the class level, that can be used inside the methods, constructors, in the blocks, everything. Okay, so instance variables can be accessed directly by calling the variable name inside the class. Okay, so you can directly call wherever you want. Instance variables are non-static variables. These are also called state variables. Okay, so we will see all these points by taking an example. Let me go to Visual Studio Code. I have created one class called instance variables. Inside that I have a main method. So let me create one constructor, public. The constructor means name of the constructor should be same as your class name. Okay, and let me create another method, public void instance variables. I'll take the name, same name, and I'll say method. Okay, so now what I'll do, I said instance variables means class level. Okay, so it should be outside of all the methods. Main is a method, instance variables is a constructor, instance variables method is a method. So outside means inside the class. In the high level, I'll mention int a is equals to 10, int b is equals to 20. Okay, so int c is equals to 1, 2, 3. Let me put like this. So now I can access these variables wherever I want. So I want to use in the constructor. Okay, I'll say system dot out dot println. I'll say a plus b. So I did not mention anything here inside this. Int a is equals to 10, int b is equals to 10, something like this. Okay, so I'm not mentioning this. I'm using this a, b inside my method. Okay, so even though it will execute, these are accessible as those are class level. Okay, so on the same way, I will use the same variables inside this method also, but instead of plus, I'll use star. Okay, I'm multiplying these two. And apart from that, what we can do, so we can take one block we mentioned, right? For int I is equals to 0, I less than 1, I plus plus. Don't bother about these things. We will discuss. Okay. Here also I'll put A by B. Okay. So if the scope of this ABC is restricted, then I cannot use this ABC in these methods or blocks in the constructor. Nowhere I cannot use. Means nowhere I cannot write. So how can I access these things? Right. Obviously, if it is not static, you need to create an instance, means object, instance variable I is equals to new instance variables and I dot local, sorry, instance variables method. Right. So because of this method will get executed. We are creating an instance to the class object. The moment when you create, automatically it will get called. No need to call explicitly because this is what? Constructor. This is constructor and this is method and this is block. Okay. So now if I try to execute this, and we'll see what happens, whether it will get executed or not. So Java instance variables dot Java. You see that 10 plus 20, 30, 10 into 20. What is that? 10 into 20, 200. And I did, instead of A by B, I can put B by A. B is greater than, right? Okay, no problem. So if you execute the same thing again, it will give 2, right? 10 2, so 2. So I'm able to access this class level variables wherever I want inside the class, whether in the constructor, in the method or block, wherever I want. Okay. So in this method, whatever it is, not here. So let me put here. I don't want to use A is equals to 10. I want to change the A value. So I can directly A is equals to 50. Okay. But don't put int here. Okay. This is separate variable then. So if I want to use the same A here, so don't mention, already we initialized here. A is equal to 50 means now the A value is replaced with 10 with 50. Okay. So I can assign the variable value in the methods if we want. Okay, we can change. We can assign another value or update the value. Okay. Now what happens? This 10 is 10 here, but in this method I changed it. 50 into 20. I think 1000 you need to get. Okay. Right. 1000. Now what happened? So okay, B by A 50, 20 by 50. So because of that we are getting 0. That's not a problem. It's working perfectly. Right. So instance variables you can call outside this class also. If you create another class, there also you can call these methods. But for that, these should be public. Okay. These should be public. So let me create another class. So I can say call variables dot Java. Okay. Call variables dot Java. I'll create a class, public class, and as usual main method, public static void main string args. So if I want to call anything, I need to create the object, right? Same way I need to create the object. Okay. Inside the same class only, if you want to use, you need to create an object. This is outside the class. So how we'll come to know that which class and which method? So you'll create an instance to that class and then I dot. Okay. I dot. What is that method name? Instance variables method. I can call that method, that is a public. Okay. And at the same time, system.out.println, I can call I dot C. What is the C? C is another variable. And okay, let me execute this. Okay, call variables. So I'm calling this method and I'm calling this variable. Okay. You'll get an error. Okay. So cannot find symbol, instance variables. Okay. We'll see. I'm getting error, right? So I think we need to mention this as a public. Okay. So I'll execute again. So still getting the issue. I think this is, we have seen that single method. So, but if you're calling from other class, I think we need to compile once. I don't know this is their limitation or I don't know the problem, but I'll do what I'll do. Java C instance variables dot Java. Okay. Now what I'll do again, Java C call variables dot Java. I'll compile again this one. So I'm not getting any error. So if I'll execute this Java call variables, you see that it executing this method. This method. If I execute this method, inside that what we are doing 30,000 it is coming from the method, and I'm calling I.C. What is that C? This is a public. So because of that, I can access outside this class. So I.C means what is that? 123. This is 123, right? 123. So I can call the methods and these things if it is public outside the class. But if it is inside this method local variable, if it is local variable, you cannot use outside of this method in the same class. So how can you access outside the class? So that is not possible. Only instance variables. This is how you can call from the outside of class. Okay. This is all about instance variables. If you go back to PPT, so what could be the possible interview questions you can face? What is variable in Java at high level? And they might ask, what is instance variable? Can you explain the instance variable in detail? Okay, that's all in this video. Thank you. Hi, in this video, we will see static variable in Java. Okay, so static keyword. Static keyword is associated with the class, rather instance of the class. So it will not associate with the object, means instance of the class. It is directly associated with the class. Sorry, the static keyword is used mainly for memory management. Small mistake, okay. The static keyword is used mainly for memory management. Okay, so static keyword is associated with the class, rather instance of the class. Using static variable, we make our program memory efficient. And the first point we are seeing, that it's mainly used for memory management. Because of your static variable, we can make our program memory efficient. Need to call static variable or method using class name, rather instance of a class. In the instance variables, we have used, okay, the variables with the help of object, means instance of the class. But here we don't need the instance of the class. We can directly use the class name to access this static information. It can be used with, the static keyword can be used with the variables, methods, imports, blocks, class. Okay, so all these can be used with static. So static method cannot access the non-static variable or method directly. Right, that we have seen in our previous video, that in the public static void main, if you want to use these public void methods, normal methods, non-static methods, we need to create an object. So we cannot directly call those. This and super keywords cannot be used inside the static context. So this and super is related to object. So static is not related to object, it is class related. So these keywords cannot be used. So what is this? What is super? We will discuss in our upcoming videos in detail. So static variable. To declare a static use static keyword in variable declaration. So we need to use that word static. So syntax, something like this, syntax access modifier, static data type, variable name. So just an example, public static string company name. Okay, normally we'll not use this. Public string is equal to something like that, right? String I equals string s is equal to something like that. But here public, you need to use this static keyword. Okay. Most important thing about static variables is that they belong to class level. What it means that there can be only one copy of variable at runtime. Okay. So in our previous video, instance variables, how many objects you create, that many instance variables will be created, right? And when it is get destroyed object, the instance variables get destroyed. But here, only one copy of variable at runtime as it is associated with the class. So because of that, it will not occupy more memory, right? For each object, it will not create memory for that. So because of that, memory efficient. When you define a static variable in class definition, each instance of class will have access to that single copy. So how many objects you create, every object will access only a single copy of this one. It will not create multiple copies for each object. Separate instance of class will not have their own local copy like they have for non-static variables. Okay. So simple diagram here. So here what I have a stack memory. Inside the stack memory, I created two objects. These are employee objects. Just an example. So this is obj1 object 1. This is obj2 object 2. So when you create an object, so these are instance variables. Okay. These are instance variables. For each instance variable, it will create emp id, emp name, emp id, emp name. If you create 100 objects, okay, 100 times this emp id, emp name will get created. But if it is static, so it will create only one copy, that is company. This company is static variable. So it will create in the class memory, it will create only once, and each and every object will access this. Every object will have the access to this. Okay. So if you company, here company, here company, if you have 100 objects 100 times, you need to reuse company. But I'm not doing that. Okay. So because of that, memory will be managed efficiently. So this is how the difference between these instance variables and static variable. Okay. When an object is created, it is always stored in the heap memory, and stack memory contains the reference to it. Okay. So this is how it will have a reference. Now, so let me clear this. So advantages of static keyword. Okay. Globally accessible means it will not depend on the instance of the class. Right. We no need to create an object. So can be accessed using class name. No object is needed. Only one instance per JVM. That is what we have seen. Only one time in the class memory it will create. So no need to create each instance. For each instance, we no need to create for that static variable. They do not modify the state of the object. Okay. Loads on JVM startup and desktop and JVM shutdown. Those are per object instance variables. It is for at the JVM level. So we have some disadvantages also. These are always part of class memory if they are not used or not. So when you create instance variable, if you create object only, then only it will allocate the memory. But here it is class level. The moment when class loads, it will create this information. If you are not using, even then also it will create. Right. So if you are not using also, you are creating, means we are wasting the memory in that scenario. Okay. Creating and destruction of static variable cannot be controlled. So if it is object, I'll create the object. But here you do not have any control. The moment when you class loads, it will get created and restricted. We cannot override the static methods. What do you mean by override? We will discuss, but static methods cannot be overridden. If one thread change the static value, that can break the functionality of the other threads. So we already discussed that Java is multi-threaded. Multiple threads will execute simultaneously. If one thread changes the static value, other threads also get impacted. That we will see. Okay. So static variable we will see by taking one example. So I created one class called static variables with the main method. Now, what I will do, I will create simple. Okay. Here, int emp id is equals to 101. String emp name is equals to, I can say, Tom. Okay. String, okay, company name is equals to as a Oracle. Okay. So for each employee, you have employee ID, employee name, in which company he is working. Fine. So now what I'll do, I'll try to print this employee information. System.out.println emp ID. So the same way, I will print emp name and let me put emp company name, employee company name. So if I try to execute this, okay, it is a main method, you can directly execute this. Java static variable dot Java. It will print that information 101 Tom Oracle. Okay. Now I have another what? Employee. Okay. And his employee ID is 102. His name is Jerry. The same company, right? We are talking about the particular company. So employee company name is Oracle. Okay. If I try to execute this, I'll get an error. I'll tell you why. So valid emp ID is already defined in the method main. So no need to, already I initialized this. You cannot use duplicate. So if you want to use the same thing, remove this. If you put integer means again you are reinitializing with the same name. So it should be unique. So if you remove this, you are just changing, you are assigning another name, another ID. That's it. Okay. So now if I try to execute this now, you see that 101 Tom Oracle, 102 Jerry Oracle. Fine. But if I have 100 employees, 1000 employees in my company, I cannot keep writing like this 1000 times. At least 6 lines of code, 1000 into 6, 6000 lines of code you need to write. And using the same code. If you are using the same code, what you need to do, you need to create a method and you reuse the same thing. Okay. So fine. I'll create a method now for this. Okay. Now what I'll do, public void print employee information or details, whatever it is. And you can pass this argument, right? What are the arguments? Int emp id, comma, string emp name. These two things are enough for me. Okay. Otherwise, I need to give the company name also. But let me put that first. String emp company name. Okay. I'm using the same thing again here. When I use here with the int emp id, I got an error, but I'm using here. So these are local to this method only, right? Because of that. So what I'll do, I'll take the same thing here. I'll print. Okay. So, but how I'll get the data to here? So I need to pass. I'll create an object to access this method. I need to create an object as this is not static. Okay. I'm talking about static variables. So after this, static variables sv is equals to new static variables. and sv dot print and to pass that information. Okay, what is that I can pass? I said 200. I can say Krishna, employee name, comma, same Oracle. Just assume. Okay, if I want to do the same thing again, okay, sv dot print 201, comma, Kumar, comma, same Oracle. Right. If I execute this now, I 101 Tom, all these things, and I'm getting Krishna, Kumar, all these things from here. So I simplified this big code. Okay. I simplified this big code. I don't need all these things now. Okay, let me remove. Okay. Simple, right? Instead of big code, I did simple. I created a method, reusable method, and I'm passing what information I want. I'm printing the same thing. But Oracle is same for each and every employee, right? So whenever you create an object, every time it will allocate the memory for this string. But this is not a memory efficient. So because of that, I can create what? I can create a static variable. Okay, where you need to create the static variable in the class level. Static string employee company name is equals to Oracle. Okay, so now I don't need this information to be passed even. Okay, I will remove this. I will remove this, and I don't need to pass this information here itself. But how I'll get that information? Right. So here I can directly use this. Right, as it will never change. This is not a dynamic data. For an employee, ID will be different, name will be different, but the company will not be different. So why to waste the memory? So right, so now I can execute the same thing. You see that even though I'm not passing, even though I'm not using here, directly I can access. Okay, the static I can directly use in the non-static method. Okay, but you can do in both the ways. You can directly use, otherwise you can use the class name dot. As already we are discussing that it is not depends upon the this object, it will depends upon the class. You see that static variables dot this class name dot, I can access this. If I try to execute the same, I'll get the same output. Okay, but what is the advantage of these things? That I can directly use the company name, then why to use this? Right, that I'll tell you why it is. But before that, if one thread changing the data, so other threads will get affected, right? That we discussed. So what I'll do now, I will change the value of, I'll create another object. Okay, I will create another object here. I can create how many objects I want, right? I'll create another object. I'll name it. You cannot give the same name. Already it's there. Why to create again? So I'll print again this information. I will print this information again, but it will be sv1 dot. Okay, sv1 dot, and I'll make it 10101. Sorry, Tom, and again Jerry. Right. So now if I execute this, another object, I'm calling those things. Now we'll see the difference. Now you do not see any issues now. We created again. So 200 Krishna Oracle, 201 Kumar Oracle, 100 Tom Oracle, 101 Jerry Oracle. But what I'll do after, what I'll sv dot EMP code name, sorry, EMP company name, I will change it to Google. Okay, you just observe using the SV object, not SV1 object. Using this, I'm changing the name my Oracle to Google. Okay, now you observe the output. Okay, we'll make it here after creating the object. So obviously SV object will use the Google company instead of Oracle, but SV1 I'm not doing any change. Okay, now you observe the behavior. You see that it updated for everything, right? I changed it with SV object. Why SV1 object also getting the same information? So in the PPT, if you go up, here you see that this is class level. All the objects will refer to this. With this object, I changed this name to company Oracle to Google. So it is changed in the only one level, right, in the class memory. So next time when EMP data object means another object accessing, then updated information will come. So if accidentally if you change, the other things will get the same thing. So that is the disadvantage we discussed, right? So if you change with this object, it is affecting means if it is with this thread, other threads will also get affected. Right, understand? So that is the one of the disadvantages. And one more thing, what we are saying, why this static variables dot EMP company name, right? So if you call this information from outside the class, not inside. Inside means you can directly call, but if it's outside the class, let me go to call variables, right? We have created for instance variables. So here itself, what I'll do, I'll create an object for static variables also. Okay. If I want to create static variables, S is equals to new static variables, S dot, right? But to access static variables, I don't need what? Object. Directly I can use the class. So what is the class? The class name is static variables. Dot EMP company name. Right. If I want to access this, first I need to compile this. Okay, that we have seen previously. So let me compile Java C static variables dot Java. So it get compiled. Now Java C call variables dot Java. Now Java call variables. You see that I'm getting Oracle. The reason is I'm using with the class name, as this is static. Static can be accessed directly using the class name. So previously, if I want to access C, I need to create an object and that object dot C. This is for instance variables. But static variables, we don't need to create an object. By directly using the class name, you can access this. So that is the difference. So in other class, you need to use class name dot that variable name. If inside the class, you can directly use. Otherwise, you can use with the class name also. Both are possible. But here, if you do not put this class variables, you cannot access. This is outside of this class. So here it is useful. Okay. So this is all about static variables. So what could be the possible interview questions? Here, what is variable at the high level? They may ask, and they may ask what is static keyword in Java and what is static variable. Okay. So that's all in this video. Thank you.